What if, instead of Luffy, the Straw Hat's chef Sanji was the one who ate the Gomu Gomu no Mi? How would his fighting style, cooking prowess, and dreams change with the power of rubber coursing through his body? Well, everything stayed the same up until Sanji escaped his cold and brutal family and ended up on the ship Orbit. The 10-year-old Sanji began working as a cook on it, and life seemed a bit better. But things took a turn for the worse when Red Leg Zeph, a notorious pirate, attacked the ship. The ships ended up caught in a deadly storm at that exact time and sank, leaving the 10-year-old and Zeph stranded on a completely lifeless rock high above the sea. Things went from bad to worse, as despite surviving the storm, the two now had to deal with hunger. There weren't many rations that had washed up on the rock, and there was nothing to eat because, unlike an island, it didn't have trees or animals thriving on it. There was no way to fish either, meaning the two had to survive on the minimal rations left. Zeph sent Sanji to the opposite end of the rock to look for a ship after giving Sanji his share of the rations. Sanji wasn't too happy that Zeph had kept a larger bag of rations, but Zeph justified it by saying that he had a bigger stomach. Weeks passed with no sign of a ship, and by this time, Sanji was down to the last of his rations. It was an odd-looking purple fruit with swirls. Sanji took a bite of the bitter fruit and rationed it for a little more time. After even more time passed without any hope of escape, Sanji had enough and decided to kill Zeph and steal his bag of rations. That was when Sanji realized that he developed the ability to stretch. His body had become rubbery because he had eaten the Gomu Gomu no Mi. Sanji stretched his arm and grabbed Zeph's bag, only to find that it was full of treasure instead of rations. He realized that the old man had given him all the food and had eaten his own leg to survive. Sanji was deeply affected by Zeph's sacrifice and selflessness. It wasn't just about the leg, though. It was about why Zeph saved him. You see, before they were stranded, Sanji had cried out his dream of finding the All Blue. The All Blue is said to be a mythical sea where all the fish in the world can be found. Old Redleg had the same dream of finding the All Blue. Zeph saw himself in Sanji's passion and chose to save him, even at the cost of his own leg. That experience taught Sanji something he would never forget. After more than 80 days of starvation and the realization of what Zeph had done for him, Sanji vowed to never refuse food to someone who was starving. He knew exactly how it felt to be on the edge of death with no food in sight, and he wouldn't wish that feeling on anyone. When they were finally rescued, Sanji agreed to help Zeph start a restaurant on the seas. Over the years, he learned not just how to cook, but how to fight as well. Zeph drilled into him that his hands were for cooking and that he should rely on his legs for combat. With his devil fruit ability, Sanji had a permanently rubbery body and could stretch, bend, and twist it in many ways, which also helped out in the kitchen. The old man was tough, but he instilled values that would stick with Sanji forever. Never hit a woman, never waste food, and always follow your dream, no matter how impossible it may seem. 9 years passed, and Sanji soon became a very capable chef and fighter as well. One day, Sanji was filling in as a waiter when Luffy was on the Barati too. The chef got into an argument with the Marine Lieutenant Fullbody, and the lieutenant ended up wasting the meal prepared for him in a fit of anger. Now, Sanji had many rules that he followed, but wasting food? That was a line no one should cross. In an instant, Sanji's eyes darkened, and before Fullbody could react, Sanji launched an elongated kick at the Marine's face and sent him flying across the room. The Marine barely knew what hit him before he was smashed into the wall. Sanji later ended up feeding the Marine prisoner Jin, who was starving, when the rest of the chefs refused to feed him. This gave him additional points in Luffy's book after the entire thing with Fullbody. Everything added up, and the captain of the Straw Hats offered Sanji a position on his crew. Sanji initially refused, but that would change after the altercation with the pirate Don Krieg. After being fed, the notorious pirate quickly revealed his true colors, bent on capturing the floating restaurant. Sanji was quick to deal with the pirates that invaded the restaurant, and our boy Luffy joined Sanji to fight off the pirates. Luffy's brute strength and Sanji's whip-like kicks made quick work of the pirates, eventually defeating Don Krieg. After the battle, Sanji received Zeph's blessing and joined up with the Straw Hats to chase his dream of finding the All Blue. Unlike in the original timeline, Luffy didn't have a devil fruit since Sanji got the Gomu Gomu no Mi, so we're going with the route that Luffy just got pretty strong in hand-to-hand combat. Instead of using a variety of highly creative moves, Luffy would go for brute strength fighting along with using a staff. Since he doesn't have a devil fruit, he's developed a stronger body and endurance, and can use a staff to fight, similar to Wukong, the Chinese god he's based on. Moving on with the story, since Nami stole the Going Merry, the crew headed off to Arlong Park. The events would play out similarly to the original story. Only Sanji would have a greater edge fighting off against the fishermen on the island. His kicks quickly took down Karubi. He then joined up with Zoro and helped Luffy defeat Arlong. Nami officially joined the crew after Arlong's defeat. The events at Logue Town, Reverse Mount, and Whiskey Peak would play out much the same, all the way up to the ending of the Alabasta arc. However, things would be incredibly difficult for Luffy since Crocodile is a Logia-type devil fruit user, while Luffy doesn't even know Haki at this point. Considering this situation, it is highly likely that Luffy will end up badly beaten and eventually begin using his blood to fight. Or maybe he'd bathe his staff in water, which might allow him to attack Crocodile. Sanji might also join the fight, but he wouldn't be as effective as Luffy since I doubt Sanji would fill himself with water to attack Crocodile. Option 2, with the staff and water, seems the most likely method Luffy would use to face off against the Warlord of the Sea. So I believe the Straw Hats would end end up defeating Crocodile and ending his operations all the same. Continuing with the story, the crew's next stop is Skypiea, the island in the sky. Much like the original timeline, the crew would eventually find a way to Skypiea, and that's when Sanji would truly shine. When Enel faces off against Sanji, Usopp, and Nami, things will go very differently. Enel's devil fruit, the Goro Goro no Mi, is a Logia-type devil fruit that allows him to control lightning at will. Although an exceptionally powerful ability, the devil fruit is rendered useless against Sanji. Considering how versatile and smart Sanji is, Enel would be unable to keep up with Sanji's flurry of kicks, and his invulnerability to Enel's attacks would render the Logia user a minimal threat. Instead of Luffy, Sanji takes Enel head-on and wipes the floor with him, ending his tyrannical reign over the people of Skypiea. The events of Water 7 would play out much the same, including Nico Robin leaving the crew and Frankie joining up. By this time, Sanji has learned to implement fire in his kicks, and using the power of his devil fruit, he gets much faster and stronger. He also begins utilizing the effectiveness of his rubber body to make his legs bouncier, increasing their speed manyfold, and with it, the force behind his kicks as well. Jabra is defeated after a fairly difficult fight, and the crew rescues Robin after declaring war on the world government. The next stop was the eerie island of Thriller Bark, where Sanji faced more than just the usual chaos. He quickly found himself in a nightmare involving zombies, shadows, and an invisible foe who threatened the crew. The worst part of all this, though, was that Absalom didn't just have the power of the devil fruit, but also wanted to marry Sanji's beloved Nami. Sanji wasn't about to let that slide, and his kicks were a force to be reckoned with. After defeating Moria, though, things got dicey as the warlord Bartholomew Kuma arrived. Despite his powers, Sanji and the rest were no match for the warlord and were quickly overcome. The crew would soon make their way to the Sabaudi archipelago. After the crew's normal shenanigans, things took a turn for the worse. Kizaru arrived on the island after Luffy punched a celestial dragon, and soon the crew was all but dismantled as Kuma arrived and sent each Straw Hat to a different island to train. All the while, in the background, Luffy's brother Ace had been captured and was under marine custody, being kept for execution. A war was brewing as the Whitebeard pirates were taking up arms to fight at Marineford. When Sanji was hit by Kuma's abilities, he went flying for 3 days until he landed on a relatively isolated island. Bruised and battered, Sanji took in his surroundings. The area had some exceptionally large trees and shrubs that seemed to dwarf him in size. He began roaming around to find something to eat when he realized that the entire island seemed eerily quiet. Sanji couldn't hear any movement at all except the wind brushing through the trees. He decided to put that thought aside when he spotted some fruit. Sanji climbed one of the trees to get the fruit growing on one of the branches, only to come face to face with a massive monkey. Sanji tried to grab the fruit, but the monkey punched him hard, and Sanji ended up flying into a nearby tree, breaking through it. Astounded by the strength, Sanji realized that this beast power was on a scale of its own. He looked up, but the monkey had disappeared by this point. He only caught sight of the beast when he suffered another punch to the gut and was launched through even more trees. The monkey's strength wasn't the worst part of all this. It was the fact that the animal barely made any sound before attacking. Sanji had to put in all of his concentration just to barely sense the creature as it approached. When all hope seemed lost and the monkey was pummeling Sanji, a loud sound rang through the forest as the monkey came crashing down to the ground. As the dust cleared, Sanji saw an old man standing on top of the beast, having formed a crater with his body. Oddly enough, the man's eyes were completely closed. The hermit approached Sanji and asked him how he'd gotten on the island, but our chef fainted before being able to tell him. Sanji next woke up a few days later, wrapped in bandages. After getting up, the old man gave Sanji some food, and Sanji asked him what this place was. Sanji learned that the island was home to some colossal beasts that were highly territorial. The beasts were also attuned to not make any sounds and were really hard to track. The old man himself had been living on this island for a long time and had learned not to use his sight to detect anything. The man told Sanji that he was able to sense the animals using his observation haki. This was an entirely new concept to our chef, who learned that it grants the user the ability to sense the presence, strength, and emotions of others, as well as gain limited precognitive abilities. The information took Sanji aback, but he soon remembered what had happened. He asked the old man to guide him to the nearest village. He had to somehow get back to the Straw Hats. The old man agreed to take him after Sanji's wounds had healed. During this time, Sanji treated the hermit to his cooking skills, and after a few days, the two left for the nearest village. Using a certain technique called Soru, the hermit took to the sky while grabbing hold of Sanji and dropped him off at the nearest village. Upon reaching it, Sanji learned what had happened at Marineford. Luffy's brother was executed, and Whitebeard had passed away as well. The news was extremely heartbreaking, but the most important thing was Luffy's picture. Sanji decoded the message in the picture, which signified that the crew was to meet up in 2 years instead of 3 days. Realizing the gravity of the situation and how he needed to become stronger, Sanji went back into the forest to find the old hermit again to train with him. Sanji had to sneak through the forest while fighting off the occasional beast, and in a few days, he found the old man. Despite Sanji being bruised again from the journey, the old man saw potential in him and agreed to train him. Sanji learned the man, too, mainly used kicks, but the gap between their abilities was like the land and sky. Despite his relatively strong frame, the man had enough power in his legs to shatter the ground with a stomp, and he was extremely nimble. unstoppable. The old man began Sanji's training. The training was brutal from the start. Sanji's first task was to survive against the smaller beasts, which were still as large as houses. The old man emphasized the importance of leg strength and speed, teaching Sanji to focus all his power on his lower body and then shift it toward a point. Each kick had to be precise, strong enough to knock down these mighty creatures. Sanji's training involved dodging strikes from these beasts, while also delivering devastating blows. Sanji's mentor told him that he could use his devil fruit's flexibility to make his hits even more devastating. Over time, the old man introduced Sanji to techniques he had never imagined. He taught Sanji how to use armament haki to strengthen his legs and harden them like steel to kick through the thick hides of the different beasts. He also threw Sanji alone on the island for days on end. Sanji had to be constantly aware of his surroundings even while sleeping, and this constant state of alertness allowed him to unlock observation haki and hone it to the point where he began sensing the silent beasts lurking around him. Sanji's instincts became even sharper as a result, and he learned how to use the Saru technique used by the Marines. Sanji spent months mastering his new techniques, combining the strength of his legs with the flexibility of his rubber body. His Diable Jambe evolved as well, and he was able to light his legs on fire even without the friction he previously used. Sanji further learned how to increase the size of his legs and thighs, pumping excessive amounts of blood into them and causing his strength and speed to increase manyfold. This new technique, combined with haki, made his kicks lethal, capable of breaking through even the toughest beast's armor-like skin. The final test came when Sanji had to face the island's largest predator, a massive beast that towered over the landscape. The battle was intense, but by this point, Sanji's training allowed him to predict the beast's moves using his observation haki, and his kicks were strong enough to deal massive blows to the beast. His final blow was a kick so powerful that it sent shockwaves across the island, and the mighty beast finally fell. Sanji had learned all he could from the hermit, but the man never told him anything about his past or why he was so strong. All Sanji could piece together was that he was possibly a marine, due to the fact that he could use the Soru technique, and that this man must have been an absolute beast in his prime. After 2 years passed, Sanji left for Sabaudi Archipelago to reunite with his crew. Each member of the crew had become immensely powerful after the time skip, and they showed off their skills by easily taking out the pacifista on the island. Zoro had trained under the strongest swordsman in the world, Dracula Mihawk, while Luffy had trained under Silver's Rayleigh, the first mate of the Roger Pirates. Luffy had particularly shown a massive difference in his abilities. His body seemed much more muscular, and he seemed to have a different staff. But the most interesting thing was that Luffy had grown a tail. It seems that Luffy found a devil fruit during the 2 years the crew was away, and the devil fruit was a mythical Zoan type, the monkey devil fruit, model Sun Wukong. The gang headed out to Fishman Island, liberating it before going to Punk Hazard and then moving on to Dressrosa. The villains in the previous islands posed almost no threat to the monster trio, considering their newfound abilities. The events at Dressrosa unfolded mostly the same, with the tournament, Luffy's reunion with Sabo, and Sabo getting the Mera Mera no Mi. Things took a twist when Sanji faced off against Doflamingo while protecting the Thousand Sunny from him. The fight began in the sky, with Doflamingo using his strings to maneuver while Sanji used his skywalk technique. The battle got really heated as Sanji used his speed and observation haki to outmaneuver Doflamingo. The strength Sanji gained from his training was formidable to the point where Doflamingo had to bring out the big guns. The antagonist awakened his devil fruit, and the fight moved on above the ground where Trafalgar was. This was when Sanji showed off the true fruits of his labor. He began pumping blood faster throughout his body and coated it in armament haki. Sanji used the elastic force of his body to hover in the sky. This form would be similar to Luffy's Gear Force, only Sanji would maintain a much leaner body shape and gain a massive boost in speed, increasing his strength even further. The ensuing fight was cataclysmic and could be felt across the island. Other fights erupted between the Straw Hats and Doflamingo's gang across the island. Despite being an extremely powerful opponent, Doflamingo was not able to keep up with Sanji along with Trafalgar Law's support, so they were able to defeat the Warlord of the Sea. At this point, the Straw Hats' overall strength was on a whole other level, considering Luffy's new devil fruit and Sanji's use of the Gomu Gomu no Mi coupled with his brutal training. After the mess on Dressrosa, much like in the original timeline, Sanji was forced to go to Whole Cake Island because of the threat Big Mom posed if she was angered, and later on, the fact that Germa 66 threatened to take out Zeph if Sanji didn't comply. Things had become dicey since Sanji couldn't defuse Big Mom's threat with just appearances, and eventually, the other Straw Hats came around to get Sanji back. This time, Zoro and the rest headed to Whole Cake Island as well, along with the Straw Hat Grand Fleet. Individuals such as Cavendish, Bartolomeo, Sai, Ideo, Leo, Hadrudin, and Orlumbus. For this timeline, a war is going to happen between the Straw Hats, their allies, and the Grand Fleet formed on Dressrosa versus the Big Mom Pirates to spice things up a bit. Luffy and Sanji have gotten exceptionally strong at this point, and what better way to test the strength of the crew than by putting it up against the crew of one of the Yonko? The Grand Fleet assembled near Whole Cake Island, with Luffy at the helm. The Big Mom Pirates had already received word that the Straw Hats were looking to attack, but Big Mom didn't believe them to be a big enough threat and continued focusing on her tea party. Meanwhile, the people gathered for the tea party were largely unconcerned with the Straw Hats, as they didn't believe they would pose a threat to an emperor of the sea. Meanwhile, Sanji was in disarray as he realized the entire crew had come just to get him back. Big Mom sent Smoothie and Cracker to handle the Straw Hats along with Oven and Daifuku. The parties clashed on one of the islands, and it was a spectacular fight. Luffy had gained significant mastery over his Devil Fruit by this point, and the abilities of the Monkey Devil Fruit gave him spectacular strength. Coupled with hockey-based abilities, Luffy could take on both Smoothie and Cracker alone. Zoro and the rest handled the other high-ranking members of the Big Mom Pirates, while the Grand Fleet commanders and the rest of the Straw Hats took on the fodder. Big Mom's worst mistake was to underestimate the Straw Hats, and word soon reached her during the tea party that Smoothie, Cracker, and the rest of the forces she had sent had been defeated by the Straw Hat Pirates. The Straw Hats themselves had suffered minimal losses, as the commanders had taken the brunt of the attack, and Luffy had handled the commanders. The pirates and forces at the tea party were all buzzing with the news, and soon, seeds of dissent were sown in the minds of the individuals who were against Big Mom, such as Capone Bege. Things only calmed down once Big Mom loudly raged. Everyone quieted down out of fear. But then, news arrived that the Straw Hats were closing in on the tea party. The rest of the Big Mom pirates began preparing for battle with Katakuri at the helm. Big Mom herself was in a quietly sadistic rage as her party was interrupted. Hence, she intended to kill off Luffy and destroy the crew for good. The stage was set for a war of titanic proportions as the Straw Hats met the remaining forces of the Big Mom pirates head-on. Sanji, seeing all this, realized that he needed to step up as well. As Luffy arrived with the rest of the crew, Sanji clashed directly with Katakuri. Both opponents had exceptional observation haki, but Katakuri's ability was one step ahead, bordering on future sight. As Luffy and Zoro clashed with Big Mom, the entire party descended into chaos. The rest of the Straw Hats and the Grand Fleet clashed with the Big Mom pirates and her homies, while Sanji took on the strongest Sweet Commander. Clash between Sanji and Katakuri was intense, as Sanji used his speed to try and override Katakuri's precognition, but Katakuri's defensive capability was beyond the charts. Katakuri created massive attacks made of mochi to reduce the openings Sanji could create, and soon began attacking Sanji from all directions. Sanji's observation haki wasn't too bad either, and he used it along with his speed to avoid the vast majority of Katakuri's hits. Sanji activated his technique, and his speed increased massively. Sanji tried to hit Katakuri with a long-range kick, but Katakuri's body acted as if it were a low gia, and the kick passed through his body. Katakuri used the opportunity to pull Sanji towards him and punched him hard in the face, sending him flying across the area. Before Sanji could recover, Katakuri phased above him and hit him again, sending him to the floor and forming a massive crater. Sanji got back up and began launching a flurry of attacks at Katakuri, his observation haki getting better as the fight continued. Sanji finally landed a few attacks on Katakuri, who began fighting more seriously. Meanwhile, Luffy was holding his own against Big Mom, as his abilities allowed him to both dodge and counter Big Mom's attacks. Along with Zoro's help, the two were in a fairly good position. The rest of the Straw Hats were also keeping up with the commanders, although they were getting outnumbered as the homies and Big Mom pirates began swarming them. The fight on this side seemed to be going pretty well when suddenly someone came flying and crashed into a wall near Luffy and Zoro. The two found Sanji unconscious and buried in the wall. In the next moment, Katakuri showed up and attacked Zoro, taking the heat off of Big Mom, who began to overpower Luffy. Sanji had kept one of the strongest members of the Big Mom pirates preoccupied, but with him being buried in a wall and out for the count, the tables quickly turned on the other two members of the monster trio, as they could no longer tag team against the Emperor. Things began getting worse as the fight progressed, and Luffy couldn't see how badly hurt Sanji was. He yelled at the top of his lungs, calling out his friend's name, and suddenly the sounds of drums could be heard across the battlefield. Sanji, with blood running down his face, started to rise from the rubble. His body glowed with a strange light as he unlocked the true potential of the Gomu Gomu no Mi. The flames around his legs roared to life, turning white. His entire form began to shift and stretch in ways he never imagined before. The drums of liberation pounded as he entered his new form. Sanji's once precise and calculated movements were now unpredictable and incredibly powerful. His legs began moving in erratic ways at blinding levels of speed, seemingly defying the laws of physics as he engaged Katakuri once again. Katakuri's foresight couldn't keep up with Sanji at this point, and he had to go on the defensive. Meanwhile, Zoro and Luffy took the opportunity to become even more aggressive with their assault as they helped Sanji out, and suddenly it became 3 versus 2. The monster trio against the Emperor and Sweet Commander. But with Sanji's awakened Devil Fruit, the fight would heavily go in favor of the Straw Hats. Unless some other party intervened, it seems likely that Big Mom would be defeated in this timeline, as Sanji would prove to be exceptionally overpowered at this point. His creativity with Gear the Fifth of may not be as amazing as Luffy's, but it would be interesting to see either way. But what would happen if an Emperor was defeated at this point in the story? The world would be thrown into disarray. The Marines would have an absolute field day if Big Mom was defeated. Kaido would also start taking the Straw Hats seriously by then. He might even go on the offensive himself after realizing that the Straw Hats posed enough of a threat to defeat a Yonko. But if Kaido doesn't go on the offensive, then the later fight with him would go by much easier since he wouldn't have have Big Mom allied with him. And if Big Mom weren't there, that would help level the forces available with the Straw Hats. Be sure to subscribe and click the like button for more One Piece videos.